Hello and welcome everyone to our next session. Today we welcome the two Robs, Rob Quickenden and Rob Randall from Sicilian, and they're going to be talking to us today all about the benefits of adding voice to Microsoft Teams. Now, as an organisation at Cornerstone, we've done that, we've implemented it, and so if Rob and Rob want to sort of use me as an example, then by all means, please do. Rob, ask any questions. For those of you at home that want to ask questions today, we do have the Q&A running alongside, so please do post them, and there'll be a time near the end where we can ask some of those questions. So without further ado, we welcome Rob and Rob to the stage.
Thanks very much. So it's Rob 2 here, so Rob Quickenden. So I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Sicilian, joined with me by Rob Randall, who is one of our senior Microsoft UC and voice architects. The goal of today really is just to walk you through a little bit about Microsoft Teams and particular Microsoft Teams as a phone system, rather than just Microsoft Teams as you'll know it within the curriculum for teaching and learning. So we're going to try and keep this relatively high level. I've got Rob with me to go into some of the technical details as necessary, and like I say, questions. If we're going too slow for you or we're not taking enough, please to chuck that into the window, and we'll endeavour to go at a different pace. So very quickly, just a little bit about us for those that don't know us. So at Sicilian, we've been in business for 20 years. Our foundation strength as an organisation has always been around unified communications. So we came from the Cisco world. We've got Avaya experience, Mitel experience, but most recently, really for the last 5 or 6 years, it's been focusing around helping organisations move from traditional on-premise voice solutions into Microsoft. That started off as OCS into Lync, Skype for Business, and of course Teams. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this. We hold lots of Microsoft accreditations. We hold our advanced voice specialization. We have lots of referenceability, and we know voice really well. So that's kind of a very quick play on us, because today's not about us. It's all about how Microsoft Teams can help serve you. So I'm not going to talk much here about Teams itself. Most of you, I'm hoping, will know what Microsoft Teams is. There's a little bit of a definition there, but for many of you, you'll be using Teams for collaboration, for managing assignments and schoolwork and all those other wonderful things. And I kind of often say to people, think of Teams. If you don't know Teams, think of it as a kind of combination between Slack and Zoom, but something that has been built specifically for education. The education version of Teams is quite different to the commercial version of Teams, which here at Sicilian that we use. But of course, there's a lot more. Teams is what Microsoft classes an extensible platform, meaning you can add third-party applications, your own applications, and other Microsoft applications into that suite. And of course, today we're going to talk about voice. So as I said before, Teams is not a phone system in its own right. If you knew Skype for Business back in the day, that really was a phone system that had IM capability. Teams is not that. Teams is a collaboration platform. However, Teams can be your phone system, and Microsoft have built a quite extensive enterprise-grade phone system capability directly into Teams that you can activate and leverage should you wish to, and you should. So what is Teams phone system? So the first thing to point out is it is cloud first and cloud only. So unlike Skype for Business, where you could deploy Skype on premise and probably like your existing phone systems, if it's not Teams, they probably sit in a data center, or they sit in a cupboard somewhere inside the school and connect to ISDN lines and things like that. Teams is cloud only. It's a constantly evolving platform. So Teams is about 3 years old now. There are circa 4 to 5 new features or enhancements rolling out into the Teams platform every single month. It's pretty crazy. It's about to get even crazier. The pace of development is pretty rapid. Teams voice is something you traditionally do as part of your wider Teams project. So it's usually the last workload within Teams that gets deployed. That's not by design. It's just typically where organisations and sometimes go through is they start off using Teams for collaboration and teaching learning, and then voice is something that comes along at the end. Voice in Microsoft Teams means two things. It means kind of peer-to-peer voice, so point to point, talking between two people over IP. So it's a bit like if you think of your WhatsApp video calls and those kind of things that you might do. But it also includes PSTN voice, so dial tone voice, so calling someone's mobile phone, calling a student's parent or carer, for example, over the voice network. And a little tip at the bottom is if Teams hasn't been deployed well within your establishment, then you'll probably find your Teams voice integration will be quite poor. So do make sure that that Teams is working well for you before you look at deploying voice services. One of the things that comes up quite a lot, and what I'll ask you to jump in here if you don't mind, is the kind of what do you get with Microsoft Teams? So what services are available within Teams as a phone system? And that's quite important when you think about what you're going to be migrating from when you move into Teams. And Rob, I know this is something that comes up a lot when you're doing designs with schools and other organisations.
Yeah, so it's something that comes up a lot in workshops, as I say, when we're starting to do the sort of detailed workshops and similar to the workshops that we would have done with Cornerstone Academy Trust over a year ago. We find that, what people tend to do is try to do a point feature comparison between what is Teams and what is their traditional PBX. And the thing you have to always consider is that a PBX has evolved over a period of time. So, I used to work for Nortel Networks. They had this green policy that basically started from about the 1980s and went right the way through to 2009, when basically the actual PBX department was sold out to Avaya. But everything on there was actually effectively an evolution of what they started with. So they would end up with about 5-6 different features just for call forwarding, just on a particular IP phone. So you have to consider, it's not to consider where you are today, but it's actually to consider where you want to get to. So I think that's the key thing, is not to focus on the individual features, but also to think about how you want to change the way that effectively the people are going to communicate once they move into Teams. So things that are challenging at the moment, still a little bit, contact center, call recording, analog devices, those sort of things are still a bit of a challenge, but that gap is actually closing very rapidly.
And I think, Rob, just to add to that, one of the things that we've seen a lot over the last, I guess the last few months now, is lots of other third-party companies that have always done voice services launching their own Teams certified, if you like. So Cisco have got a voice platform that you can plug into Teams. 8x8 have got a voice system you can plug into Teams. What's your view on those things from an organisation looking to migrate? Why is that maybe not as recommended as taking the phone system services from Microsoft?
We've often talked about this, Rob, and I think it's the native experience. I think once you have the native experience, it's a bit like, as I say, we do Cisco as well. So again, if it's very much a Cisco house, you want it to stay a Cisco house, because effectively you get that full native experience. Whenever you start integrating a third party, whatever third party it is, you always get some disjoint between effectively that third party and the way it actually integrates with the actual platform you're trying to work with. So generally, it's things like 8x8. They've got some great contact centers, but it's very agnostic to Teams. So you lose all the things like your presence capability, how you do presence routing, anything like that. Is very much, sort of, again, you've got that separation of the two platforms. So again, I'd always say you've got to weigh up of exactly what you're trying to achieve and what the experience for the user is, because I think that's the key thing, is the experience for the user. If it's a very good experience, the users will actually love it. If you've got a very sort of disjointed experience, users will always find a way around it, and that's where you get we've always talked about shadow IT, and that's why you get a similar sort of thing in telephony. People will find a way around, and the typical one is they'll go to their mobile and they use their mobile.
Yeah, I think you're right there, and I think one of the things for any of you on this call, if you're using Teams today, you'll have a phone icon within your main Teams dashboard, which you can use for making internal, as I said, voice over IP type calls, and the user experience is great, and you simply, once voice is enabled within that, you click on that phone icon, and it's exactly the same, other than you get a dial pad and you get all your core phone functions built in within Teams. So that user experience and actually onboarding and training becomes really simple. So just moving on from that, one of the things that people often ask about is, how do I use Teams? What tools do I have to manage calling? What can I do? You saw the kind of big list of features, if you like, on the other side. But the key things really around this. So there's a web user interface, as you'd expect, to manage everything within Microsoft Teams. They call that the Teams Admin Center. It's simply just another blade that sits within the admin console. From there, you can manage auto attendance, you can manage your call queues. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. You can manage actually how the PSTN, so how the dialing works. So whether you're using calling plans from Microsoft, and again, we'll touch on this, or whether you're using what Microsoft referred to direct routing, and again, we'll cover that a bit later on. But all of the things on this list, and I won't read the list out to you, but these are all kind of managed within the Teams Admin Center. And we've got a couple of screenshots later on just to show you what some of those things look like. As you'd imagine, and you'll be used to Microsoft Teams, any device anywhere is the theme of the day. But absolutely, Teams, as you'll know, runs on your PC, on your Mac, on the web, on your favourite iOS, Android devices, and of course, there's also dedicated phones. Cornerstone are actually using the Yealink devices. I think they're extremely great quality. I kind of compare them to Samsung at Bush pricing. Really, they're really great. They I think have really led the way. They were the first manufacturer to have dedicated Teams phones. You can see there from the user interface, it is essentially the Android client that runs on those phones, slightly tweaked, but really great, really great interface. The question, of course, is always now, I think, as to whether you need phones. And David, I know we've spoken a little bit about the use of dedicated phones versus using the mobile clients or the soft clients. I don't know whether you've got any kind of thoughts or advice for anyone on this. David.
I do. It's the whole handset debate has gone on for several. It's been going on since we actually implemented this new phone system. And before, we were wondering, I suppose we were so stuck in our ways, so traditional, and that's where everyone seems to be at the moment with a handset. We put handsets in all of our rooms, and of course we use the Teams client on the computer. If I'm completely honest, now I have a handset here. I have a very nice handset. It's the Yealink that I could probably just show you in the camera. It's a very nice handset, but unfortunately, even though it's really nice and it runs the Teams client and it's brilliant, I very rarely now use a phone, a handset. I actually just dial from my computer. I speak on the webcam. It works. It's brilliant. I understand that there's some meeting spaces that require maybe some, you don't want everyone to hear the conversation, and so we put handsets in there. But because they sit at their computer with a headset, actually the handset has become so redundant. We had someone last week, one of our staff, whose the phone stopped working. I think the wire became unplugged and she didn't realise, but the phone stopped working. Instead of asking someone, can they fix the phone, she actually just unplugged it, bundled up the wire, put the phone in the drawer, and just went, well, I don't use it anyway, so it's just clogging up my desk space. Now that is just one example of how we've now made that massive shift from the traditional handset into this world of using Teams on many devices, mobile phones, computers. It's certainly not for everyone, but it's a way that somehow we've evolved into, and I don't know if that is the norm, if that is the way it's supposed to go, but it's where we've ended up.
I was just going to come in there, David. I think, I was talking to Rob about this. I've got a customer that we're rolling out Teams Voice for now. They deployed, because of they're a very traditional sort of handset environment. They deployed 190 handsets across their board. Now, obviously, with the whole situation that we've all experienced recently with the COVID-19 and the lockdown and all suddenly working from home, what we've suddenly found is that actually they've now been discussing that effectively everyone's now got headsets. They're all working from home. They're talking about when they come back to work and come back in the office, they don't want a handset. So suddenly we've rolled out 190 handsets, and now that this change of operation and change of working has suddenly happened, they've suddenly realized that actually you don't need the handset, you can use the headset. So yeah, I agree with you. I think there is a bit of transition, and I think it's something that's really worth considering for any organization, when they start considering actually, moving from a traditional PBX environment where you've got lots of handsets everywhere to Teams, is how many handsets do you really need, and what's the best way to move forward.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think from thank you both of you for that, and I think it's important to understand there are phones there, because as you say, lots of organisations do feel the need still for phones. It can also be a bit of a safety blanket, I think, for a lot of organisations, because they're used to having a piece of plastic. Some people quite like slamming a piece of plastic down when they cross. I have a few people like that I work with, but I think it does come down to actually use the time to evaluate. I think if you're looking at Teams as a phone system, speak to the partner that you work with, talk to the distribution companies you work with, and borrow some devices and have a look at them. And I think I'd also really encourage, as part of, and we'll touch on kind of roll out later on, but do ensure that through a pilot, if you've got the time to actually run a pilot, that you involve people that members of staff that probably think that they do need a phone, challenge them and really see if they can get on better without that. I think COVID has been has forced people to work from home, and therefore for many organisations they haven't taken their phones with them, so they've been forced to use a headset or use their laptop a little bit more. And it will be interesting as people go back to the office and back into the schools, whether they will continue that trend. So just bear that in mind, that the phones aren't massively expensive, but of course it adds an expense to the cost of a deployment. If you're taking phones out and replacing them, then it's a great way of saving desk space. I think, as David said, I think for common area and for classrooms and things, then putting a phone in the room is probably an obvious thing, but I think you can massively reduce the cost of rolling out phones. So again, this is kind of showing you a bit close up what a phone looks like. I won't dwell on that too much. I've said here, I apologise, this slide's not presented particularly well, but this is kind of mind the gap, as I call it. But there are some features that people will look at and say, well, hold on, they're not available today for me. Rob touched on a couple of those things earlier. I think pretty much now everything that anybody would expect from a phone system is there. We have some extremely large organisations, several thousand users using Teams as their phone system, and for many it's the case of Teams and those kind of platforms adapt and help you change the way that you work. And I think the reason that these kind of projects tend to fail is more because people don't understand what it is that they're moving to, and they expect a modern system to work in the way that the old system kind of used to work. So I think it is, again, the importance of understanding what you're moving to, investing that time in a pilot program and making sure that you've got your staff on board as to what you're doing. So we're going to touch now on some of the advanced features. So some of the things that are really key to any organisation, but I think particularly to education, is how calls get routed. In a traditional corporate environment, everyone's sitting at a desk all day, or they're out and about, and they've therefore got their mobile phone calling. Of course, that's not the case within a school. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time working through David and the team as part of the deployment for Cornerstone was how we handle what we call the advanced features. So auto attendance. So IVR functions when you call, and actually how calls get routed. And Rob, I think you did the design and the implementation of this. Would you like to just talk through a little bit around the challenges that Cornerstone had and how you helped?
Yeah. So when we started doing the workshops, one of the discussion points was at that time there were 2 schools that David and Jonathan and the team actually looked after, and there was a 3rd school coming online. Now, at the time, the 2 schools had completely separate, sort of receptions, separate numbers, effectively. So you dial a different number if you want to get to the school. And I think the idea was that what they wanted to do was bring it to a point that basically parents, anybody from external can call a single number and effectively reach the academy. So once you've reached the academy trust, then you can be routed to a Pacific Academy within that trust, and that's what we did. So basically what we did is used auto attendant services to provide that. But not only did we do it for effectively being able to talk to effectively the administration staff and talking to the reception in each of the academies, but what we also did is we actually looked at how we could use that auto attendant services, and I also worked with David and Jonathan and team on this to actually be able to do things like doing absence recording. So effectively, your automated absence recording, basically the parents are able to leave a voicemail. That voicemail then goes into effectively their email system, and they have a number of mailboxes for those for each of the actual academies. So, and any of the admin staff can actually access each of those mailboxes, and they can actually then be able to then build up a register of any of the children and the parents that basically have reported that they're not going to be in school that day. And I think that was all part, David, if I remember correctly, this was all part of your safeguarding as well, wasn't it, to make sure that you're fully understanding of obviously where those students are at any point in time.
Absolutely. And it took away the issue of location for us, and it didn't really matter who was it didn't matter when you phoned in, you didn't have to be routed anywhere. The team were working centrally to point you in the right direction, and that flow system, again, it didn't matter which number, or you phoned the main number and it would route you in the right way anyway. So
and I think the other part of this is it's basically it's time of day based as well. So basically it gave us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we could do it. Now, as we always say, that basically auto attendant and call queues are not a contact center. They're not designed to be a sort of professionalized contact center. But for academies like Cornerstone Academy Trust, when we sat down and we worked it out, we were able to use the fact that we can nest basically auto attendants and call queues together to really come up with quite a fairly complex routing scenario, which allowed us to effectively meet all the requirements that David and Jonathan and the team actually required.
Thanks, Rob. And I think this probably moves on quite nicely to the other big topic, which is reception consoles. And this again is quite an important consideration for any academy when they're deployed. Do you want to just touch a little bit on the reception consoles and kind of, I guess, what's changed really in the last 12 months since we deployed Cornerstone solution?
Yeah, so obviously with Cornerstone's solution, what we were looking at is obviously for reception console and for the people that have to take the majority of the calls, the initial point of contact. What we wanted them to have the ability is a capability within a single client to take multiple calls and handle multiple calls at any one time. So what we actually looked at is at the time there were no native Teams actually reception consoles at that moment in time. So we looked at a number of solutions, and actually the one that actually suited for Cornerstone Academy Trust was actually what's called the Attendant Pro, which is from a company called Landis Technologies. But it's effectively it's a client. And what it does is the skin on the client just basically makes it look like a Teams, but effectively it's running in a sort of Skype for Business coexistence mode in the background. But it effectively allows the receptionist to manage the call and to actually then basically push the call to whoever they need to. And if they need to push it to a voicemail, they can push it to a voicemail. They can either transfer a call and have it done as a safe transfer, so effectively they can pull that call back if for any reason it drops into voicemail, and basically anybody who's calling in needs to talk to typically a person rather than a voicemail account. The changes that happened, the real big changes that happened obviously recently, is we've got more and more organization, basically vendors out there that are now starting to look at, obviously what they can do around attendant consoles and type of reception consoles. So you now get sort of third-party hosted services, and a couple of them are Luware and as Anywhere 365. And I know we Rob, don't we? We partner with Altigen, and we do work with Altigen, but the slight difference in this is it's effectively what it is. The actual console itself is like a Skype for Business federated type service, and then what the actual vendor out there and the hosting company is actually doing is they're using the new Microsoft Communications API to provide some advanced presence and some advanced routing in the background. There obviously is a price difference between those, and I personally sort of tend to stay away from pricing, so I let that happen with Rob, but there is a price difference with those, so that's something that has to be considered in any sort of deployment. But I think what we're going to see with this communications API that came out, Rob, I think what we're seeing a lot of advanced developments and accelerated developments in this area. So I think over the next sort of 6 months, we're going to see this change quite dramatically, and you're going to end up with a native reception console for Teams.
Brilliant, thanks, Rob. And I'm just conscious of time, so I'm gonna skip forward a little bit and just talk about the important things here. So how are we going to connect Microsoft Teams to the PSTN network, essentially, and there's two key ways of doing this. That the first one is what many accounts will do, and really any organisation that's less than probably about 500 voice users this is usually the most cost-effective way. But you have two methods, as you can see on the slide there. You can either take what Microsoft refers to as their calling plan. So Microsoft becomes your telco. You subscribe to those calling plans through your license provider, and you can buy calling plans in sort of 120 minutes, 240 minutes, or more per user. Those minutes are pooled across the team. So if you've got 10 120 minute calling plans, then that's 1,200 minutes that are pooled across those users. Or you can use what Microsoft call direct routing, where you take either an existing SIP service. So if you've got session border controllers already, as long as they're certified for use within Microsoft Teams, you continue to use those. Therefore, you've got your own numbers. You haven't got to migrate those. Or you can take a hosted service from someone like Gamma or Tata or any of the kind of hosted voice providers, whereby you can use direct routing, and of course they work in more of a traditional way, where you've got buckets of pool minutes across, and a lot of the time it does come down to, particularly in the UK, it comes down to kind of what's more cost effective and what have you got. Rob, I don't know if you've got anything else specifically to add to that.
No, the only thing I'd say about direct routing, especially some of the hosting companies like Gamma, they're actually also hooking it into their own sort of like hosted telephony solutions as well. So if there are certain things that you find that don't sort of fit within Teams, there's an alternative option to look at. You can start looking at some of the things that, say, Gamma's a typical one. They'll hook it into effectively their hosted VoIP solution, and that can give you other features and other capabilities in the background. So
brilliant. Calling plans, which I think probably will be most relevant to most of you on this session, but just a couple of bullet points there that to consider. So obviously, you're located here in the UK, so the UK is covered. There's about 11 countries that are covered by Microsoft with actual calling capability in country. So worth bearing in mind. You can port your existing numbers to Microsoft. So Microsoft have a managed porting service. It's got a lot better over the last year or so. But essentially, whatever phone numbers you've got through whatever providers, you can port those numbers across. I know one of the banes of Rob's life with some of these migrations we do, particularly where you've got multiple schools or buildings that perhaps have phone numbers assigned on different blocks or through different telcos. But essentially, the calling plans are licensed and assigned at a user level and across to your tenant, so your Office 365 tenant. As I said before, they're pooled by the same plan, so you can have 120-minute pools, 240 minutes. You can even have international minutes as well. You can also buy what they call communication credits, which is an awful name, but it's essentially like a top-up pay-as-you-go type model. That if you overrun the minutes that you've got consumed, then it will chip in and start using communication credits. I don't know many organisations that ever dive into those things, but they are quite useful, and they can be particularly useful actually for things like premium rate numbers, or where you want to offer 0800 numbers, so free phone numbers for people to call into. Then they will consume communication credits. So in all, I think it's a really good model. It's centrally managed, one single portal all through the team's admin center. It's all managed by Microsoft. Everything is through Microsoft. Microsoft's your single point of contact for support. So it does make it quite easy. You haven't got to worry about procuring session border controllers or worrying about SIPs or those kind of things. It's just kind of done for you. It also makes it really easy to try this out as well. So if you wanted to try 5 users with Microsoft Voice, it's quite easy to do. You can just go onto the Office 365 portal. Once you've got the licensing, you can acquire some temporary numbers from Microsoft and just give it a go. So it's great from a POC pilot type environment to try these things out. Rob, anything I missed on that?
No, the only thing I would add is the Microsoft porting team. Yeah, they're really good. They are really supportive. Yeah, if you're doing any porting, it's a really good service, and they pretty much manage everything for you. So I find them really useful, especially when we got complex number plans to move.
Fantastic. Very, very quick on diet routing, just for completeness. So this is essentially the bring your own carrier model, if you like, or bring your own SIP as it's often called. So there's a couple of different models. As I said before, you can have your own session border controllers if you've already got them in place because of the phone system that you're running, or you can have a carrier managed service where you essentially you lease the SBCs off them and pay them, or you can have a dedicated managed service, so they provide the SIP service and the hosted the SBC. So they kind of call that hosted direct routing. And again, I find this much more relevant for probably large universities that have global footprints, for large corporate organisations that have got coverage all over the globe, where they have already negotiated big global rates with carriers like Pure IP and those kind of things, where they pay such cheap rates. Microsoft can't really compete in that kind of space. But again, things to think about. There are some more network considerations to obviously worry about, because Microsoft don't take care of those things. So you do have to make sure you've got the right IPs and certificates and those kind of things. But we would obviously cover that with you as part of a design to make sure it's the right model. Number porting. So Rob touched on this briefly. You can port your numbers across. So lots of myths. Oh, I have to have a new number. I have to have new numbers and things to assign. You don't. You can port a range or all of your numbers across into Microsoft. It's a relatively slick process now. It's getting better. They do now have an SLA. It used to be we'll do it when we get to it. They do now have a 14-day SLA. And again, Rob, I think we used a combination of porting and new numbers, did we, for Cornerstone?
Yeah, we did. So as part of this sort of like the initial pilot and POC, we basically pulled a block of Microsoft numbers across. And then when we do as part of the workshop we were doing with David and Jonathan and the team, and talking about the numbers and what was required, it actually came down to really we only wanted to require 2 numbers. And the only reason we were keeping those 2 numbers was because those were the original effectively main numbers into the two academies that effectively already had telephony services. So what we did is we used a mixture of both. So what we did is it was easier to port the number range across. So we ported the number range across, but effectively pretty much everyone within the Academy Trust had new numbers, and effectively we gave a brand new number for the sort of main reception or the main single point of contact into the Academy.
Fantastic. And again, just a quick note on those. So there are a couple of different numbers, as you'd imagine. So you've got user numbers or subscriber numbers if you use the old terminology. So there is numbers assigned to individuals. So I have my own dedicated phone number as I would on a mobile. You have numbers assigned for call queues or service numbers. So this might be your main reception number. Again, they can be toll free phone numbers, or I do hate this American terminology, or toll-free numbers. Again, the same for auto attendance. And again, for conference bridges. So if you're using Microsoft Teams already and you use Teams meetings and you've got audio conferencing licenses, then you'll be familiar with the audio conference bridge, where people can dial into the conference if they've not got internet connectivity or they're using an old school phone. And again, one of the key things, and this is more relevant in the US, but it's becoming more relevant in the UK, is you need to make sure that locations are assigned to people within Active Directory, so that we can assign emergency locations and things. So if anyone needs to phone 999, they know where those numbers are coming from, and that's a pretty obvious thing, obviously, to think about. I won't dwell on this too much, but it's something that comes up quite a lot more so in the commercial space than education and kind of higher education universities as well, is where they've already got a big complicated voice platform. Then the ability to integrate Microsoft Teams into that phone system, rather than actually taking full-blown Microsoft voice. So we're sort of a bit short on time, so I won't go into this in any depth, but this is kind of part again of what we would review as part of a design process. So you can integrate, you can have calls flowing between two. It's most common when we're doing complicated migrations and people need to coexist between an on-premise voice platform and Microsoft Teams for a period of time. And again, there's some things that you can do and things you can't do. So it's just worth bearing in mind those in mind. What's it cost? Would you need to do it? Quite important. So you need some base level licensing from Microsoft's, and then really the voice services are add-ons. So if you're using A1, A3, any of the education licensing plans, then you can bolt Microsoft phone system, which is the cloud calling aspect, and PSTN conferencing onto those services. If you've got E5 or A5 in education terms, then you do get phone system as part of that, as well as PSTN conferencing. You then just need to pay for the bundled minutes if you're using Microsoft calling plans. You've also got meeting room and common area phone licenses. So Microsoft have got a dedicated license for meeting room equipment and for phones that have their own dedicated license, because that's a device license rather than a user license. Calling plans, as we discussed, that you'll need. And also we touched on communication credits if you do want to almost have a burst over, if you like, or a big bucket of minutes to allow you to call outside of that. Outside of the licensing aspect, then of course you need to consider phones. Can be quite a big expense. Anywhere from sort of £100 up to sort of £250, £300 for a phone, depending on what features you want. And whether you want video and a big screen or a small screen. Headsets, again, Microsoft will recommend that you have Teams certified headsets. There's some quite cool headsets out there now that have even got a Teams button on them that will pop up your Teams client for you when you hit the button. They are certified. They do have HD voice. They do quite clever noise cancelling, all the other kind of things, which is probably more critical when you return to the schools. Direct routing, if you're going down that route, of course, is a cost. Migration costs, so you will need to install the environment or use a partner to help you configure and design and install. There's potentially training as well, both for your IT service desks and also for your users, just to make sure they are used to using these things. So again, they're things I would suggest you don't miss out. It's really important that users are comfortable using the platform and know how to use everything as you'd expect. Because the biggest complaints you'll kind of get is, people think things don't work. They do work. It will be down to, network, understanding the network, or making sure users actually know how to use the tools, headset issues, and those kind of things. So the training aspect is really important, just to make sure users know how to self-diagnose. They are using phones and they're not quite working. You don't want phones being stuck in desks and not being used, because that's just a waste of, obviously a waste of everybody's money. I have skipped a couple of slides, and we have put the slide deck in. I think we're going to share the slides with everybody afterwards, but I just conscious of the time, we just wanted to kind of move on to the kind of typical pathways of how we deploy. So where we do deployments, and this is a very similar model to that we worked on the Cornerstone, is, you know, you decide you want to go down the voice route with teams and start looking at some things. You read all the collateral, etc., etc. We do a little mini workshop with you. We have a look at what you've got today. We look at the numbers that you're using, how you're using the technology, and then we'll work through with you on the kind of options and things that are available, go through costs with you, help you understand the licensing, look at the licensing levels that you've already got. Sometimes we can kind of have a chat with Microsoft, see what there is for Microsoft to help sponsor some of these things, and then we kind of really move on to the agreeing that scope. And Robert, I don't know if you want to just walk through these last couple of steps for us.
Yeah, so obviously, what we'll do is we'll work through the scope and produce an HLD and high level design. That high level design really will define out effectively what we're going to deliver in terms of, what type of PSTN connectivity, whether you need porting, whether you don't need porting, also all the features that we're trying to achieve. The one thing I would do, just going back to the step one, is effectively we do an audit of the legacy platform. There are some tools out there. Typically, most of the times we'll do this just more as a talk and chalk type audit, but there are tools out there for specific, sort of like things like Cisco and Avaya that can literally take an output from those and actually do a feature comparison with those against effectively Teams, and it'll give you effectively an idea of if there's anything that you're going to be severely out of step with. Once we've got scope of works done, then it's effectively it's the tenant configuration. The majority of the work is done in the tenant configuration. Obviously, if you go down the direct routing, then there's potentially the SBC configuration that has to be done. But generally, what we tend to find is that obviously, especially in education, a couple of deployments I'm doing recently, they're going for a hosted solution, so they're having everything from a hosting partner anyway, so they do all the configuration of that. So effectively the only thing we and the academy have to worry about is effectively the tenant configuration part of it. So we'll work through that and actually deploy that. One thing's not shown on here, we normally run a little bit of a pilot. It could be a POC, but it's sort of like, to give you an idea, to basically get yourselves familiar with effectively how that service works. And then we go into more into the deployment side. And then as we go into the deployment side, it's really working out those phases, how you start switching over from, I think, David, we were sort of pushed on time, so I think it was a bit more of a big bang for you guys. But normally we, sort of if we can be done over a phased time, then we'll do a bit more of a phased approach in terms of that deployment mode. And then as part of that phased approach, then obviously making sure that you're rolling out the handsets, any meeting rooms, common area phones, and then make sure that you've got those letters of authority submitted if you're going to be porting any of those numbers. Because the key thing with the porting is Microsoft, they give you an SLA of around about 14 days, but it's the losing carrier that really sets that time and sets that pace. So the losing carrier can effectively make that that could be a 30-day cycle in terms of their SLA. So Microsoft manage that, but it's the losing carrier that makes that decision. So once you get to that point, make sure all your users are ready to go. Obviously we go through the migrations, start migrating people across. Typically what we're doing is in the deployment cycles is we'll have floor walkers, we'll have people that sort of like out there, champions helping users with the adoption. And then at the end of that project, obviously once everybody's crossed, we can then start closing off the project and move it into whichever support department. And it may be that Sicilian are providing support, or basically there's a mixed blended support between Sicilian or basically us and say some of the hosting companies.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just conscious we're ever so slightly overrunning, so if we're just okay for 2 more minutes. A few bits of technical prep just to consider. So again, think about all these things. Make sure the network is good. If you've not done a network assessment on your environment at all around Office 365, make sure you do one. You want to make sure that your voice will be going over the internet essentially. So you need to make sure it's good quality. do think about time for number porting, particularly if you start doing these deployments at the end of the summer and you've got a deadline of when obviously when the kids come back, then it's really important that those things have been done. So do allow plenty of time for those things, and make sure, of course, if there's phones to roll out as well. The other key thing is, make sure you allow time to get the new phones deployed. If they're power over Ethernet, have you got enough power over Ethernet ports and those kind of things? So these are all things that should be done as part of the design, but these are kind of some of the gotchas that come up quite a lot. And again, we've touched on some of this here, but around the performance. But if you're using Teams and laptops and things on surfaces or whatever you're using, then obviously Wi-Fi is key. If any of you use Virgin Media at the moment, but all I'm getting at the moment is network performance problems because my Virgin Wi-Fi is so poor. But the internet is obviously critical to how these services work. The non-techie prep stuff, I think, is probably most important. So remember your change in communications planning, particularly if you're not planning on giving people physical desk phones. It's a big change for people. Moving from a physical phone with buttons to a soft phone is a big user experience shift. Although they do that today with Zoom or WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or whatever else they're doing, it seems to be a concept that you have a plastic phone on your desk when you're in the office or when you're in the school. So that's a big thing. So think about how you're going to run that. Think about feedback from users, and how you take that feedback and kind of feedback. And David, I guess one last question for you, really. How has that feedback been? I mean, you've been using Teams Voice now for nearly a year. How's it been? It
was difficult to begin with, and I'm going by like Rob Randall just said. If we were thrown into it. We chose that, and in some cases that's probably the best way, being thrown in at the deep end, being forced to use it. Actually, we've come out the other end actually thinking how brilliant the system is and what a great move it was. I suppose with now in the current crisis and way of working that we're going through, they say every cloud has a silver lining. Well, albeit this may be an extremely dark cloud, but I think the silver lining is it's highlighted how beneficial, how useful this way of working is. And actually, if people are out there thinking about making the move into the system similar to this, then I can only say absolutely go for it, because it's brilliant. One key bit of advice for us is to absolutely find a firm that knows the education sector, knows what you want, and actually is willing to do it. And we found that with Sicilian. They've done a brilliant job. We're now in a place where our system works fantastically, and so I can certainly recommend Sicilian, and I can certainly recommend a Teams integrated phone system. So that's my final words from me.
I think final words from us. So I see we're out of time, so I'm not sure whether there were any questions in the chat window at all.
There was one question. Is there any literature that they can pass on to their IT team? I think there's probably lots of people out there that have seen and been inspired by what you've been saying. Is there any literature that we can pass on, or any websites we can point them towards?
There is, yeah. I mean, I think for most of these, if you go to any of the IT team there, if you go to docs.microsoft.com, which used to be the old TechNet sites, there is extensive, technical documentation around that. If you also just go to microsoftteams.com, you'll find they have a whole adoption portal as well, which kind of gives you little videos and things of kind of what to expect around the user experience. But my biggest advice will be try it. If you're using Teams already, speak to your licensing provider, get a couple of trial licenses. They'll probably even be able to get you a couple for a month for free, and try it. Absolutely try it. Speak to the team at Cornerstone. They support this on a daily basis, and I think you'll see how simple this really is to use. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Rob, for joining us. Some brilliant insights into integrated phone systems and using Teams as part of that. It's
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Thank you all of you for watching. This session is recorded and will be made available to watch again. So if you rather than having to ask for the slide deck, you can by all means watch this again and use it all. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you. Thank you for this part of it. Thank you.